Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Inflation continued to climb in October, with consumer prices rising 6.2% from a year ago, the fastest rate since 1990, with gasoline up almost 50% over the last 12 months and beef prices up 20%. And as prices soar, real wages are falling, with the Labor Department reporting this week that average hourly earnings fell after inflation 0.5% in October and are down 2.2% since January. The Biden administration scrambling to respond to the bad economic news, insisting that more spending is the answer. Here's White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain.
The Build Back Better bill is the best answer we have to bring those costs down. By the way, it also does it without adding a penny to the federal debt. It's fully paid for, and without raising a penny of taxes on families making less than $400,000 a year.
Let's bring in our panel, Wall Street Journal columnist Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel and editorial page writer Mene Ukabirua. Bill, they said it was transitory, kind of looks persistent after 5 months in a row of 5% or more inflation. So what, is this going to extend into next year?
I think it is. Look, you see the Biden administration switching on this. First, they were saying it's not real or it's only transitory. And, now Joe Biden's saying, gee, do you ever think gas prices would be this high? They're trying to take it seriously because one of the problems is you can't spin inflation. Ordinary Americans feel it. My daughters that are just out of school feel it when they go to the gas pump. I went to the grocery store, bought a sack of groceries, just one bag, $65. So people see it and feel it. And, what's interesting to me is that the people that tell us this isn't really a problem, or it's going to go away, they're the same people that told us it wouldn't be a problem now, that it would go away in September when people came back to work and so forth. I don't know why we should believe them today.
Kim, how much responsibility does do the policies of the administration bear for this price surge?
Well, they bear entire responsibility, and that's why it's not likely to be transitory, because this is policy fueled. What we're having here is a classic supply-demand mismatch, which is why prices are going up. Now, demand has been utterly fueled by these giant payments that Washington has sent out. We spent almost $6 trillion over the last year, a little bit more than a year, because of the COVID thing. On the same time, supply is severely curtailed because you've got a labor shortage. Those transfer payments are going into homes. It's causing people to refuse to go back to work. So that's a labor supply shortage, as it were. And then you have an administration with regulatory policies that are designed to impose new costs and regulatory and tax burdens on companies, which is crimping supply, especially in the areas of energy. So unless you change some of these policies, inflation is likely here to stay, and that's before you add in some other actors like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, Mene, the real problem here politically for the administration is what you call real wages, because those are declining. That is after inflation wages. Nominal wages are going up, and people are getting nice raises. But a lot of that's being wiped out by inflation. How big a problem is that politically?
Well, we've had this narrative so far throughout the entire wave of inflation going back to last year, where a lot of Democrats have been saying that some of the labor conditions we're seeing right now are actually going to be positive for workers. Because a lot of businesses are short-staffed, people are able to hold out for raises, and they've been getting raises on paper sort of month over month. And yet what we're seeing is that those paychecks aren't stretching nearly as far as they might have in ordinary circumstances, and people really are noticing. And so I think that's already played out electorally. The elections that we saw in Virginia and New Jersey with the Republicans overperforming probably have a lot to do with people looking at their monthly expenses and realizing that they're hurting a little bit in their bank accounts more than they used to be. And they know that the reason for that is because of the amount of spending that we've seen from the Biden administration, even tracing back to last year, some of these emergency stimulus bills that were sort of being framed as necessary to get the economy back on its feet, despite the fact that growth was already returning. And now we're seeing the passage of the infrastructure bill and potentially an additional several $1 trillion from the reconciliation bill. And so voters are going to hold Democrats accountable for adding money to an already overly supplied money supply.
Bill, Joe Manchin had warned months ago about inflation and spending. Is he going to take action now and do something to defeat this new bill?
I hope so. He has every reason because, as you point out, it's not a recent complaint he's had. He's suggested this for a while ago. And look at how the Democrats are responding. They want to pass this spending with no score, no scoring to give us an honest assessment of what it would cost and so forth, because they don't want us to know how much it would cost. People talk about the political hit Joe Biden would take if his Build Back Better fails. And clearly, if your signature domestic agenda legislation fails, that's a hit. But I think Democrats might take a bigger hit if they put it through. Inflation continues to rage, and a year from now, before the midterms, we're in even worse shape than this. So I think Joe Manchin would be doing his party a favor if he hangs in there.
Kim, where do you think Manchin's going to come out on this?
Well, he's been pretty clear all the way from the start of these discussions that one of his biggest concerns was inflation. And as we know, he has a lot of concerns with the product that's going into the House bill at the moment. He says he's not even working off of that bill. I definitely see him pushing his party to delay this, but it'll matter on how strong he is, because there is no appetite for that right now anywhere, and including the White House.
All right, they're going to be fascinating to watch. When we come back, with inflation surging and his poll numbers sagging, President Biden and his party are facing an uphill battle for control of Congress next year. Former Clinton pollster Mark Penn on whether it will take a midterm shellacking for Democrats to move to the center. Next. Amid surging inflation and sagging poll numbers, President Biden is facing an uphill battle to maintain even his slim congressional majority next year. And my next guest says that without a major course correction, 2022 could be devastatingly bad for the president and Democrats. So will last week's results in Virginia and New Jersey be a wake-up call for the party, or will it take that midterm shellacking? Former Clinton pollster Mark Penn is chairman of the Harris Poll and chairman and CEO of the Stagwell Group. So, Mark, good to see you. I guess the question is, why has the public turned so quickly against Joe Biden and the Democrats?
Well, it's been a pretty dramatic turn since about the middle of the summer, and it hasn't abated. It obviously really stepped up when he pulled troops out of Afghanistan and left Americans behind. Only 33% approve of his Afghanistan policy. But on top of that, the economy, which was perceived positively going into the summer, is now perceived negatively, and 60% blame the administration for inflation, and also rate the administration quite negatively on immigration. And the top issues are really the economy now, the virus second, immigration third. And so this is a tough spot for any administration.
Well, some Republicans say that the big issue was the culture, the identity politics, the culture war, critical race theory, the schools. But how much of it, in your mind, in Virginia and broadly across the country, was the culture, and how much was the economy in the elections?
Well, I think when you look at Virginia and New Jersey, you see a similar result, even though the candidates talked about different issues. And that says to me that it's suburban voters, these are both two big suburban states,
right,
who really switched, and they switched on some combination of education, inflation, gas prices, dissatisfaction with the old Democratic formulas that were being peddled by the candidates. And so I think it was a little less about culture, more about bread and butter economics. And you look at, say, the suburbs in Virginia, they went basically 56% for Biden. They instead went 56% for Youngkin. Without those voters, the Democratic Party cannot get across the finish line.
Yeah, is it that the voters have decided that the spending plans of the Democrats are in fact linked to this inflation, and that is the reason the Democrats are blaming the Democratic Party for prices rising?
Yeah, I think Ron Klain's analysis that don't worry, we've got this couple of $1 trillion bill. We're going to tax people for it. It's going to be paid for. It's not, that does not reassure people. People understand that big government expenditures in the middle of an inflationary spiral could be throwing gasoline on an economic fire.
Is that the reason the Democrats, after spending all this money, and they say they're puzzled by it, right? They passed the $1.9 trillion in March, party line vote, child tax credits, unemployment benefits, new benefits, food stamp benefits, and all of that. And they say, why aren't we getting any credit for this? We gave you all these freebies. And they seem puzzled by it. Is it because it's linked to these larger problems?
It's linked to the decline in administration ratings. And at the same time, as the virus seemed to recede in the economy, instead of taking off, was perceived as going into the tank. And remember, immigration is a pretty big issue, too. Okay. And the administration has about a 35% approval on its immigration policy. So there's a whole group of issues here, all of which have been negative, and the administration doesn't seem to want to address them and turn it around. They don't want to do what Bill Clinton did, move to the center, save the presidency. It was too late for Bill Clinton to save Congress, because their wake-up call came after the '94 congressional midterms. The wake-up call is now, but they're not waking up.
Okay, so your prescription, your advice, when you say move to the center, how?
Well, you move to the center. You would have to do something about gas prices, and that means reversing some of the policies you put into effect. You'd have to do something about the border, right? So it means some real policy changes, not just changes in rhetoric. You would have to look at how you might tailor the bill to avoid inflationary pressures, and you might put the climate change stuff on a more technology-led, slower, tax-based incentive basis, which now is about $600 billion or $550 billion. And remember, Elon Musk is already the richest person in the world.
So pare back that spending bill, that $4 trillion thing, and maybe try to see if you can just put together a much smaller bill, more focused, and go ahead with that.
Absolutely. And I think Manchin and the moderates have been angling for that. You remember 53% of Democrats are moderates. The party is genuinely split. Only 25% of the country is liberal. So the expectation that the AOC and Bernie Sanders coming from Vermont and the Bronx really represent the country was always, a non-starter as a proposition.
All right. Thank you, Mark Penn. Good to see you. When we come back, Black Lives Matter versus Eric Adams. Anti-police activists threaten New York's mayor-elect over his vow to restore law and order.
Today.
If they think that they're going to go back to the old ways of policing, then we're going to take to the streets again. There will be riots, there will be fire, and there will be bloodshed.
A warning from Black Lives Matter activists this week to New York City Mayor-elect Eric Adams, saying there will be riots, fire, and bloodshed if he makes good on his proposal to reinstate plainclothes police units amid a spike in violent crime. Adams not backing down on his promise to restore law and order.
This city is not going to be a city of riots. It's not going to be a city of burning. This is going to be a city where we're going to be safe. We're going to have the backs of our police officers, but we're going to hold them accountable to do their jobs. And so if fringe elements want to hurl rhetoric like that, that's silly to New Yorkers.
We're back with Bill McGurn, Kim Strassel, and Mene Uka-Barua. So, Mene, make sense of this exchange this week. What are these BLM activists trying to do with Eric Adams?
Well, basically, they know that Eric Adams was elected on a platform of restoring public order to New York City. We've seen a historic spike in crime since last summer after a wave of protests following the killing of George Floyd. And so Eric Adams was gracious enough to invite them to Brooklyn Borough Hall for a sit-down meeting to hear out their agenda. And the meeting became very, very contentious almost immediately. They were talking all about how they don't believe there's any such thing as a good cop, knowing Eric Adams himself was a police officer for 22 years. But as we saw in that clip, the real explosion kind of came afterward, where they said that if Adams follows through on his plan to bring back the anti-gun units, these plainclothes officers, that they would basically encourage all of the members of Black Lives Matter to sort of take to the streets in riots. And we've seen that they're able to actually marshal people to their support, and that they have a lot of supporters kind of in a broad left-wing coalition throughout this country. And so that is not an empty threat whatsoever. But Eric Adams, I think, did the right thing basically by coming out the following day and saying he's still committed to reviving these anti-gun units, and that he is going to, sort of make sure that he follows through on his campaign promise to restore public order to the city.
So, Bill, what did these these anti-gun plainclothes units do, and why does the left hate them so much?
Well, they hate them because they're successful in taking down crime. Look, there's no question that the NYPD knows how to take on crime and reduce violent crime. They did it for like 2 decades. There's no question about that at all. The question has been, will you have a mayor who backs his police force when they try to keep the city safe? And anything that's effective, like the anti-crime units, I mean, that's the fundamental part of the NYPD going after bad guys. They're going to attack, they're going to sue, they're going to do all these things. They're going to threaten. Frankly, this is sort of a more modest version of Bill Clinton's Sister Soldier moment. Eric Adams not only campaigned on restoring public order, that is why he was selected over all the other Democrats in the primary. So he knows this is his test, and so far he doesn't seem like he's going to give in to the people trying to bully him, and he can't.
Right. If he does, they'll roll him on everything.
Right.
So, Kim, let's broaden this out beyond New York to the message that voters sent in the election last week about policing, about defunding police, and about crime control.
Yeah, Eric Adams and his victory was hardly alone. If you look to Minneapolis, that's where there was this initiative on the ballot to essentially get rid of the police department in the city. That failed by a wide margin. You look at different cities around the country where there were mayoral races, in particular Seattle, where the candidate who was promising more law and order won, but you saw that in different cities around the country. Another couple of interesting ones because they're a side piece to this issue about defunding the police, but one of the problems when police, they say it's not just having enough money, but the fact that they arrest criminals and then you have these district attorneys who just put them right back out on the street with no bail, etc. So in Long Island, there were a couple of interesting DA races where the Republican candidates beat Democrats specifically over this issue of bail reform and returning repeat offenders to the streets. People are speaking, and they're speaking up loudly that they want changes in policies.
Monet, are the national Democrats, the party itself, getting this message, and any signs they're changing?
Well, you did see a little bit of awareness that the message of abolish police departments, defund the police, which a lot of Democrats adopted immediately in the wake of the George Floyd protests last summer, was running out of gas. I think even by the time of the Democratic convention last year, you saw Democrats trying to pivot away from that and save face. But they still have a very strong, large activist wing in their party, which is influential specifically in their primaries. And so they're trying to play this balancing act, basically saying, we want to reform police departments, we want to ban police from using chokeholds and other tactics that they are essential to them in trying to apprehend criminals. But then when they have to turn around and run in these general election contests, you do sometimes see them sort of trying to back away. And so they're torn between their activist wing and the demands of voters.
All right, still ahead, cancel culture alive and well in Chicago as the left targets the CEO of McDonald's for speaking up about murders in that city. Under pressure from the left, McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczinski is apologizing for a text he sent last spring to Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot about shootings in that murder-racked city. In a private text to Lightfoot after her visit to the fast food company's headquarters in April, Kempczinski addressed the killing of 7-year-old Jaslyn Adams in a McDonald's drive-through shootout, and that of 13-year-old Adam Toledo, who was fatally shot by police calling both deaths tragic, but adding, quote, "The parents failed those kids, which I know is something you can't say, even harder to fix." We're back with Bill McGurn, Kim Strassel, and Mene Vuka-Barua. So, Kim, tell us why people want this CEO to apologize and whether he really has anything to apologize for.
Yeah, it's part of woke culture. We've seen it everywhere, whether it's pressuring companies to take a stand on Georgia's voting reform or anything else. These days, if CEOs don't toe the line of liberal progressive politics, they become a target for all of these groups who demand a resignation. And no, he has nothing to apologize for. To simply suggest that parents have some role in the fate of their children is hardly an outrageous, obnoxious, or even crazy thing to say. It's a normal thing to say. And it actually goes to the root of the policies that we are going to need to address to fix some of these issues that lead to all of these homicides in a lot of these urban districts. So unfortunately, though, he is apparently apologizing. And that's how this always seems to roll these days. We need CEOs with more backbones.
Yeah, Mene, this shows how deep this woke culture has embedded itself even in corporate America.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the McDonald's CEO of all people has nothing to apologize for in this case. I mean, McDonald's is one of those companies that invests very regularly in poor communities. It creates a path to the upper middle class and success for a lot of black people in particular who are able to open up franchises there. And the CEO is doing exactly what he should do by talking about this tragic shooting death that took place at one of their restaurants. And to Kim's point, I mean, not only is it a general point that parents bear some responsibility for the fate of their children, but in this specific shooting, the 70-year-old who was killed was there with her father, who is gang affiliated, and he was killed apparently by a rival. And so he was very, very responsible for the fate of his daughter appearing in public with her. And so that the CEO of McDonald's was talking to the mayor about solutions they could find to improve public safety at their restaurants and throughout the city in general is a wonderful thing. He put his finger on the problem exactly, but that's exactly what the woke critics do. They collapse every single incident down to a narrative of oppression. They don't care about the specific details, and they're attacking him merely to kind of flex their muscles and show that they're able to take down another target publicly.
So, Bill, more broadly on this woke issue, James Carville, the Democratic strategist, said Democrats need to get away from this identity politics, woke stuff. But a lot of Democrats are accusing Republicans in the election of waging a phony culture war. You wrote about that this week. Why don't you elaborate on that and whether or not Carville's right?
Yeah, I think he's right. He said that the Democrats need to go to a woke detox center to get this out of them. And he cited like taking Abraham Lincoln's name off a building and all the white supremacists. You know, the comment about the phony culture war was Barack Obama in Virginia accusing Glenn Youngkin of raising these phony culture war issues. That was on top of a lot of left-wing criticism, including from Terry McAuliffe, saying that Glenn Youngkin was running a racist campaign. The Lincoln Project tried to smear him as a white supremacist. And I think as James Carville was getting to, this is leading to ridiculous things. In Los Angeles, Larry Elder, African-American radio commentator, was hailed as the candidate of white supremacy. Same thing happened in Virginia. Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, first African-American woman to win a statewide office. She's hailed as an advocate for white supremacy. It shows, one, that they don't have an argument, and they want to bully people into silence. And I think the public is responding. I mean, I think most of the public that saw this McDonald's CEO statement would have the reaction that Mene and Kim had, talking about parental responsibility and also saying how you can't say that today and that it's tragic. I think most people would sympathize with that, and they see these people bullied off stage.
Kim, briefly, any signs that the Democrats will move off this?
Well, the fact that they are actively saying, oh, we're not really engaged in critical race theory, and oh, we're not woke, and this is all phony, goes to show that they understand just how dangerous this is and that there's a backlash against it. But it doesn't stop them still from taking direction from the liberal wing of their party, which is still very much committed to all of these policies that we were talking about that define that woke agenda.
Yeah. All right. Still ahead. Growing concerns amid signs of a Russian military buildup on the Ukraine border. General Jack Keane on just what Vladimir Putin is up to next.
It's not exactly clear what the Russian intentions are, and we don't want to see any action further destabilize what is already a very tense part of the world.
We don't have clarity into Moscow's intentions, but we do know its playbook. And our concern is that Russia may make the serious mistake of attempting to rehash what it undertook back in 2014, when it amassed forces along the border, crossed into sovereign Ukrainian territory, and did so claiming falsely that it was provoked.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken Wednesday warning Moscow against making a serious mistake amid signs that it could be trying to repeat its 2014 invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's defense ministry said last week that about 90,000 Russian troops are positioned along the border, raising alarms in Kiev and Washington. So just what is Vladimir Putin up to? Let's ask retired four-star General Jack Keane. He's a Fox News senior strategic analyst. Welcome, General. Highly unusual for a American official of that ranking to warn Europeans about something like this. How concerned should we be?
Yeah. Well, this is really very curious here what's taking place, Paul. I mean, there's a fair amount of misreporting on this, and I think actually some faulty analysis by the administration. Here's what I'm suggesting is certainly those who say there's nothing to be concerned about. Certainly, you made the point. There's 90,000 troops in the vicinity of Ukraine, so we're always going to have some concern, and we should always be watching in terms of what's taking place. But here's what's happening. There are three things, I think, that drive you to the conclusion that a military offensive is not imminent. Number one is the 41st Combined Arms Army, which people are tracking the elements of, is actually moving away from Ukraine and closer to Belarus. And they're doing that to move from temporary basing to more permanent, hard stand winter basing. So it's a seasonal thing that's taking place. The 1st Tank Guards Army, elements of which are just conducting a training exercise, are not moving closer to Ukraine. Secondly, politically, if offensive was coming, the rhetorical escalation would be dramatic and significant inside of Russia for justification, and also certainly targeted at Ukraine and the region. And while there is some elements of rhetorical escalation, it's minor and it's more normal that takes place before the Norway format meetings that will be upcoming over the issue of Ukraine. And the third thing is, strategically, Paul, it makes no sense. Here's why. Yanukovych was pushed out of Ukraine, Russia's stooge back in 2014 by their own people. On the heels of the Winter Olympics, Putin was not about to suffer that kind of humiliation, embarrassment, and defeat, particularly with his domestic audience. He annexed Ukraine. He annexed Crimea. He moved into eastern Ukraine for a different reason. He wanted to make certain that Ukraine did not move into NATO and did not get closer to the European Union. Both of those objectives he has achieved.
Right.
It doesn't make any strategic sense for him to conduct a military offensive operation into Ukraine. One of the things that we're looking at the Institute for Study of War, which I chair, a think tank, is that he may, however, be setting the stage to move forces into Belarus on a more permanent basis to obviously undermine NATO, the European Union, and particularly Poland and the Baltic states. That is a possibility, and it certainly bears watching.
Yeah, let's talk about Belarus, because the dictator there, who is close to Putin, has been sending refugees from the Middle East into Poland across the border, much to Poland's dismay. And this week, that dictator said, well, if you complain about this, if you impose sanctions, EU, I might just cut off gas supplies to which move through Belarus from Russia to Europe. So he wouldn't have done that without Putin's assent, I assume.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is hand in glove. Putin and Lukashenko, while they were opposed at one time politically because Lukashenko was so independent, once the people got in the streets after a fraudulent election, it looks like they could possibly push Lukashenko out of Belarus. Putin wasn't about to have another Yanukovych incident on his hands like he had in the Ukraine. So he has stepped in, and he's been his buddy, and he's also kept troops in and out of under the guise of training to solidify that relationship. And yes, what's actually happening here, this is all about undermining our European friends for sure, and creating division, using gas to do it, weaponizing the refugee program that he has out of the Middle East. They're in Belarus, and they're pushing them into Poland to help, as the Wall Street Journal reported, destabilize that region and that country. So those are the objectives here. In the long term, they're going to continue to use natural gas as a political weapon. And why we ever permitted the Nord Stream 2 pipeline deal to go through. Here it is, another graphic example of what a strategic failure that truly is in the long term in dealing with Russia and our European friends.
Well, it seems to me that the Russians, we only have about a minute left, General, but the Russians, they feel they got the leverage now. We got an energy crisis in Europe this winter, and that gasoline threat is very potent.
Yeah, I mean, Putin will take any issue, and if he can weaponize it and politicize it to weaken and undermine the transatlantic alliance and our friends in Europe, he is going to do it, and he has it now, and he's got the resources in terms of his hand on the lever of the gas, and he's going to do it. That's a fact.
All right, General, thanks. Good to see you. Still ahead, a not guilty plea this week from a key source for the Steele dossier. Special Counsel John Durham continues to unravel the Russia case, what we've learned from the probe so far, and where the investigation goes next when we come back. A not guilty plea this week from a Russia analyst and key source for the infamous Steele dossier. Igor Danchenko was charged last week with 5 counts of lying to the FBI about his work providing information to former British spy Christopher Steele for the Democratic-funded document. The case against Danchenko is part of Special Counsel John Durham's investigation into the origins of the FBI's 2016 Trump-Russia probe, and marks the 3rd indictment. So what have we learned so far from those who have been charged? We're back with Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel. So Kim, you've been following this very closely. From all these indictments, kind of draw it all together for our audience. What does this mean?
Well, I think 2 main things. One is that we're now finding out that this dossier, which we have referred to for so long as the Steele dossier, really had Clinton fingerprints, Clinton campaign fingerprints all over it from beginning to end. So not only did the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign pay to commission it via a law firm and an Oppo research outfit, but now it turns out that we also know that one of the characters named in this most recent indictment was a Clinton campaign surrogate who was giving some of the information to Mr. Danchenko, which went into the dossier. So they're providing info on the back end and providing info and purchasing things on the front end. I think the other thing we're learning is that this narrative over the years that the Trump campaign was the one that was in bed with the Russians, it was actually opposite. It was the Clinton campaign that was working with various Russians. Not only did Danchenko, who's a Russian national, provide most of the most scandalous claims that went into that dossier, he was speaking to other Russians who gave him information. Again, this executive in the United States, Charles Dolan, was very tied up with Russians. And it brings up some big questions of just how many people knew about this and whether or not there wasn't an opportunity for some disinformation to have been slipped into there by hostile foreign intelligence sources.
Bill, where is this going? Where do you think Durham is taking this? And I ask because so far the indictments are for lying to the FBI. Okay, that's serious stuff, but he hasn't put together a conspiracy charge yet. And I wonder if there's something like that on the horizon, or if that might be left, sort of stitching it all together for people and what it meant in a written report, because it's, as you know, it's very hard to bring a conspiracy indictment.
Right. I think that's one of the big factors here. They may not be able to prove criminal liability by the people involved, but I think they may give us something more important, which is just an in-depth look at what actually happened. When you look at it, Kim is absolutely right. This is a Clinton dossier. This was an attempt, one of the biggest dirty tricks in American history, to tar a rival and get the FBI to investigate that rival. And it wasn't just the Clinton campaign. The FBI went along. Now, one of the questions we have, and we may have to wait for the end of the Durham report, is to see, was the FBI duped or were they willing dupes? I mean, either way, it doesn't speak to their credentials. Most of this investigation, it seems to me, is focusing on the front end questions, how it started, who came up with the dossier and stuff. I mean, I think there are a lot of back end questions. Some of this material ended up in FISA applications before the court. That's when you're basically alleging that the person you want to spy on is an agent of a foreign power. And some of this false information was fed into there. So I think there are a lot of questions. I'm hoping at the end, by being a special counsel, Durham has to write a report. It doesn't have to be made public, but I'm hoping that Merrick Garland will make it public.
Kim, where do you think this is going now in terms of future possible indictments?
Well, it all comes back sort of to how you framed this, but just to put a finer point on it is, what is John Durham actually trying to do here? We don't know. We're not in his mind. He has two choices. He can go out and, as you said, try to maybe bring conspiracy indictments. You can certainly make the case that there was a conspiratorial aspect to this, but the legal bar for that is quite high. And Durham is known for being a guy who likes to get his man. And so if that is a risk, he might not want to go there. The fact that these indictments have been so long suggests that his inclination right now is more to get the people he can get for fundamentally misleading and duping the FBI, willing or not, as those FBI players were, and then use those indictments to tell the true story to the American people. And, we're already seeing some movement as a result of that. It's been astonishing. There's actually been a few press outlets who've been willing to admit that they might have a problem with their past reporting.
Yeah, well, I am still waiting for a lot of those remorseful takes, Kim. There's a lot more that deserve to be made, and apologies accepted, by the way, for their criticism of us along the way. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week. Time now for hits and misses of the week. Kim, first to you.
A hit to the Oklahoma Supreme Court for tossing out a $465 million judgment against Johnson & Johnson for making opioids. Drug makers and pharmacies have become the latest windfall target for the tort bar, who are trying to claim that they are responsible for the entire opioid crisis. In reality, they did nothing more than make legal prescription drugs. This court ruling, which finds that they can't be held liable under public nuisance laws, is a small step, but a courageous one and a signal for other courts.
Okay, Bill.
Paul, big hit to Father Robert Sirico. Father Sirico is retiring from the Acton Institute decades after he founded it. The Acton Institute is based in Michigan, and its mission is to defend the moral basis of free markets. He and his merry band have been doing that for years, often on the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. So happy retirement to Father Sirico, and best wishes for an even brighter future for the Acton Institute.
All right, thanks, Bill. Monet.
I'm going to give a miss to longtime and now outgoing Senate President of New Jersey, Steve Sweeney. Viewers may have seen that Sweeney was defeated in a big upset by a truck driver named Ed Durr, who spent very, very little on his campaign. Sweeney finally conceded the race this week, and he defended his record of keeping costs low for New Jerseyans, despite the fact that he was tossed out for their record of tax increases.
All right, thank you all. And remember, if you have your own hit or miss, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot, and we hope to see you right here next week.